A snake recently fell into the window well pit by our home. And it wasn't a very big snake, it was only about 18 inches long. But we enjoyed watching the snake try to climb its way out of the pit. In order to get out of the pit, it needed to climb 3 stairs and then get over the top of the pit. And we watched as this snake lifted up its head onto the first stair and then lifted the slithery body onto the stair and then did the same thing with the second step and then did the same thing with the third step, and then it only needed to lift its head over the edge to escape, but that distance between step number 3 and the ledge was a little bit longer than the distance between each of those steps, and it couldn't quite reach it. And so we watched as the snake stretched itself as long and as high as it could go, and going to the left and going to the right, and then going on its tippy-toe tail, if that's what you even call it, I don't know. And then we watched as it tried to get over the edge, but it never quite made it. In fact, it ended up falling backwards and landing flat on its back, and it had to start all over again. And it did. It tried again and again and again, but its best try always ended in the same way, with a lot of disappointment. Eventually, after the snake was too tired to fight back against us, we eventually took the snake out of the pit and released it a couple hundred yards away from the house. But as I was watching that snake, I thought, I think that snake has something in common with all of us. That snake knows how it feels to be disappointed. I thought of anyone who has ever hoped or dreamed or prayed for a certain outcome, only to end up with something entirely different. I thought of anyone who has ever fallen into a pit of disappointment and wondered if they were ever going to escape from it. I thought of anyone who has ever felt something similar to what Moses may have felt in Numbers chapter 27, which is where we'll be spending some time this week. The context of Numbers chapter 27 is this, that after 40 years of wandering their way through the desert, after 40 years of going step by step through the wilderness, after 40 years of stretching themselves this way and that, after 40 years of frequently landing on their backs, the Israelites finally made it to the land of promise that God had given them. And just as they were peeking their heads over the edge to see the land of milk and honey that God had given them, God reminded Moses that all of the Israelites were going to be able to go in, but he wouldn't. He wouldn't be allowed in. Do you know how he must have felt? I want to begin this week by reminding you that Jesus does. In Isaiah chapter 53, it describes Jesus as a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. He is familiar with our sufferings. He is familiar with our disappointments. He became familiar with those things by choice so that he could lead us through them. And I'm looking forward to watching him do that this week for you. We're taking an in-depth look at Numbers chapter 27 this week, at the end of Israel's 40 years of wandering in the desert, when God reminded Moses that he was not going to be going into the promised land with the rest of the Israelites. Let me just read that section for you quickly. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Go up this mountain in the Abiram range and see the land I have given the Israelites. After you have seen it, you too will be gathered to your people as your brother Aaron was. For when the community rebelled at the waters in the desert of Zin, both of you disobeyed my command to honor me as holy before their eyes.'" So God is telling Moses that he's not going in, and he's reminding him why. The incident that he's referring to happened 7 chapters earlier in Numbers chapter 20. And in Numbers chapter 20, the Israelites were complaining that they were thirsty in a desert. Imagine that. And so Moses and Aaron went to the Lord, and the Lord said, "Well, I want you to honor me in front of the Israelites by going up to that rock over there and telling it to produce water." But that's not exactly what happened. Moses went up to the rock, and instead of just talking to the rock, he hit the rock twice. It still produced water, everybody got something to drink, but that wasn't exactly what God told him to do, so God told him right then and there, you're not going to be going into the promised land with the rest of the Israelites. And there are a couple of interesting things that you might be curious to hear about that incident in Numbers chapter 20. And the first one is this, is that the Israelites had been really nasty to Moses right before they started complaining about their thirst. They were complaining not only about their thirst, but they had just told Moses that they would rather be back in Egypt dying than in the desert following someone like him. They didn't care that Moses had left a very comfortable life and a very profitable life to come and risk his neck to save them from the Egyptians. They only cared about the fact that they were thirsty, that they were uncomfortable, and they blamed Moses for it. And the second thing you might be interested in knowing is, do you know what Moses was doing just before they started complaining to Moses about Moses? He had just finished burying his sister, Miriam. Miriam had just died, and the dirt from putting her body in the ground was still on the hands of Moses when the people he came to save basically told him that they would rather have him in the grave. And after that, and after God reminded Moses that those Israelites were going to be able to go in, but he wasn't, I find it interesting that Moses didn't get up and just walk away. He didn't give up. He didn't stop leading them. He continued to lead them. And Scripture doesn't give any indication that any Israelite took the time to say thanks. But we can take the time to say thanks to someone who, for us, did a very similar thing. In Isaiah chapter 53, it says this about Jesus. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. He didn't object, he didn't complain, even though he was underappreciated, even though he was in pain, even though it was our fault that he was in that position in the first place. He kept doing his job, which wasn't to lead Israel to their promised land, but to lead us to ours. And he did. No matter what else you have going on today, no matter how unappreciated you feel, no matter how in pain, that's enough reason to pause, stop whatever it is you're doing, think of Jesus, and give thanks. I recently saw a story about a young mom who was out drinking with her friends at one of her friends' apartments one night when she got into her car and she drove home. And when she got home, she realized that something was missing. She didn't have her 2-year-old son with her. She remembered taking her 2-year-old son to her friend's apartment. She remembered strapping her 2-year-old son into the car seat on her way out the door. She remembered putting the car seat with the son in it on top of the car as she got the car ready to put the car seat in. But I guess she never really remembered putting the car seat in the seat. So she went out to the garage to see if it was still on top of the car, and it wasn't. So she got back into her vehicle and she started retracing her steps. And when she was just about back to her friend's apartment, she saw a whole bunch of police cars on the street. They had found her son. He had fallen off the car in the car seat, fully strapped in, when she started driving away, and he was fine. Not a scratch on him. That's a good ending for that story. But it doesn't change the fact that Mom did something really, really dumb. It doesn't change the fact that Mom was more absorbed with herself than she was with her son. And being absorbed with yourself is often a pretty dangerous thing. In fact, that's the real reason that Moses wasn't allowed into the Promised Land. You might remember that the Israelites were complaining about being thirsty in the desert, and God told Moses and Aaron to honor me by going to that rock and telling it to produce water, but that's not exactly what happened. Moses and Aaron came back to the Israelites and they said, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water from this rock?" And then they hit the rock twice, boom, boom, whoosh, and out came the water. And what was wrong with that? Listen to their words. Must we bring you water from the rock? They didn't even mention God. Their goal wasn't to honor God in front of the Israelites. Their goal was to point out how all the Israelites complaining affected we. Think about the last time you felt disappointed, the last time life didn't quite go the way that you wanted. Did you spend more time thinking about God or yourself? Were you more eager to point others to the God who can bring water from a rock and can probably handle whatever situation happens to be going on in your life? Or were you more eager to make people see just how sad and upset you are because something didn't go the way that you wanted? Moses hitting the rock wasn't the real reason that he wasn't allowed into the Promised Land. It was because he was more absorbed with himself than he was with God, which is always a mistake, not just because of the potential consequences, but also because of what we miss when we take our attention off of God. And that is the truth, that even when Jesus was strapped down to a cross and ended up with more than a few scratches, he was still entirely absorbed with loving me and loving you. Isaiah 53 is speaking of Jesus when it says this, "He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed." We are healed in all the most important ways, because Jesus was obsessed with loving me and you, yesterday, tomorrow, and today. A bus recently arrived in the city of Seville, Spain. It started its journey in Morocco, North Africa, which is 143 miles away. And when they pulled into Seville, Spain, after 143 miles on the road, the bus driver got out of the bus and noticed something underneath the bus. It was a teenager who had been holding on to the bottom of the bus the entire way. Apparently, a lot of folks tried to cross the border from North Africa into Spain because life in North Africa is kind of difficult at the moment, and this teenager tried to escape by holding onto the bottom of a bus for 143 miles. It's a lot of effort and a lot of pain just for the chance of maybe feeling not so disappointed with life, but it didn't work because they found the teenager, they took him into custody, they cleaned him up, and they sent him right back home again, and he learned a very important life lesson that sometimes no matter how hard you try, life is full of disappointment. And he's not the only one who knows that now. And neither do you. Jesus does too. He made a long journey as well. He came all the way from heaven, not because he was trying to escape anything, but because then he knows life is full of disappointment. It's full of death. It's full of temptation. It's full of piercing pain. It's full of all sorts of people who break great promises to love you and love God more than anything. And he wanted to save you from it. So he held on to something that is far more dangerous than a moving bus. He held onto a cross and felt all of its pain, so that you could walk through life knowing that there is nothing in all creation, not even your worst me-first self-centered moments, that are going to stop you from one day seeing a promised land that is far greater than the one Moses was looking at on that mountain, one in which you will never cry, weep, or die ever again. God wanted you to be able to stand on any mountain, on any place, at any moment, and know that you don't need to be so concerned about all the ups and downs of your life, because the Lord is. And that's why Moses said what he did as he was standing on that mountain. After God took Moses to the top of the mountain, after he reminded him that he wasn't going to be going in, you'll see in Moses' words that he wasn't all that concerned about his own life. He was more concerned about the lives of the people he would no longer be leading. This is what he said. He said, "May the Lord, the God of the spirits of all mankind, appoint a man over this community to go out and come in before them, one who will lead them out and bring them in, so that the Lord's people will not be like sheep without a shepherd." It illustrates the truth that when you know that the Lord is taking care of you, it really sets you free to focus a little bit more on the lives of the people around you. So do that today. I bet you won't have any trouble today finding somebody who feels hurt or disappointed. So do something so that they don't have any trouble finding the Jesus who sets them free from those things. A number of years ago, a little 2-year-old boy named Jacob died of cancer. And on the day of the funeral, the church bells rang to signal the start of the service, and a voice came over the loudspeaker. It wasn't the pastor, it wasn't the funeral home director, it was the boy's father. He was sitting back in the pastor's office, and the pastor had given him his microphone. His voice was shaky but confident as he said, "Me and my wife just want to thank everyone for being here today and for your loving support. It means so much to us. And we want you to know how grateful we are because we got to do something that not every parent does. We got to usher Jacob all the way to heaven, where God took him from our arms and placed him into his." There's only one type of person who could ever say something like that. Somebody who knows what it's like to hurt and feel disappointed, but someone who also knows exactly what kind of God we believe in. The same God that Moses did. If you watched yesterday's video, did you notice what Moses called God as he prayed to him? He called him the God of the spirits of all mankind. In other words, he is the God who is responsible for giving all mankind life. In other words, he's the God who knows your life, who knows your struggles, who knows your unique ups and downs, and he is the God who's able to lead you through all of it. Moses saw proof of that on that mountain. From the view on that mountain, he was looking at a land of promise that God was able to provide after 40 years of desert wandering, and one that God was willing to provide for a nation that did not deserve it. But God was preparing something different for Moses. He was preparing Moses to die. That's not the way that God said it. He said, "You will be gathered to your people." In other words, Moses was going to die, and then he was going to see something that his eyes never would have been able to find in that promised land. He was going to see his sister Miriam again, and all of his other loved ones who had gone to heaven before him. God was reminding Moses of a beautiful truth that we get to live with every day, that not even death is a disappointment for the Christian. In fact, your death is the day that God finally gives your redeemed heart everything that it has ever wanted. That's why God took Moses up on that mountain. That's what he wanted him to see. And that's what he wants you to see too. That we always have a place to go with our disappointments. We go to the God who knows our lives and knows how to lead us through them.